We are going to be reviewing Apple. We won second place in ElevenLabs hackathon with our positioning intelligence agent, Edward, and I'm going to kick this off and go through some of the details and insights that I thought that I think Apple can take as a position to the market. And let's get into it.
Hello, this is Edward. Who am I speaking with?
Hey, Edward, it's Troy. So you and I are going to be doing a positioning teardown on Apple. Apple Apple has recently had Tim Cook step down as the CEO. So he put in his letter of resignation and he is promoting who is going to the top of the board here. John Ternus, a brilliant engineer and thinker, spent the last 25 years building Apple products our users love so much. So John Ternus, I believe, is the head of hardware. I have an idea on where I think Apple is going and where I think they should be going. They've led to this in a handful of their product releases, and I think that they are going to be the best hardware company to run local models and AI on. The reason being is one of their positions that they have taken for a long time is privacy. And I think that that position itself is quite interesting in the future of AI keeping your information, your data safe locally on your computer, processing locally, not sending everything to the cloud. I think that's a real strong position for Apple. It might take them some time to come around to be able to handle all the biggest, most impactful open source models. That's my first thoughts. I would love to dive into that with you, and I'd also like your guidance on what pages to read through here on Apple's website because they have a lot of content. I think they're a standard of design, but I think they're going through a massive transformation, specifically with everyone wondering why aren't they partaking in the AI race. So that's my first read, and I want your feedback.
Troy, that's a sharp read. Before I give you feedback, I want to ask you a few questions to stress test this. You said privacy is Apple's strong position going into local AI. Here's my first question. In the mind of the average Apple customer today, when they think Apple, do they think privacy first, or do they think design and status first?
I think they think design and status first and privacy second. I just went to apple.com/privacy, and the page is beautiful. I love Apple's design. It's freaking incredible. So privacy, that's Apple. Then privacy is a fundamental human right. It's also one of our core values, which is why we design our products and services to protect it. That's the kind of innovation we believe in. So I'm not going to read off the next section, but there is quite a bit of detail in here. First thoughts?
Good. So here's the tension I want to expose. Privacy is a value Apple claims, but a value that lives on a web page is not the same as a position that lives in the mind of the customer. There's a gap there. So my second question is this. When you think about the AI race right now, who owns the privacy position in AI specifically? Not in phones, not in laptops, but in AI. Who does the market currently associate with safe, private, local AI processing?
Honestly, nobody.
That's the white space. And that's exactly where your instinct is pointing. Nobody owns that position yet, which means Apple isn't late to AI. They could be early to a completely different category. Not Apple does AI, but something more like AI that doesn't leave your device. That's a category nobody has claimed yet. Now here's my third question, and this one is important. John Ternus is an engineer. Hardware is his identity. So the question becomes, does Apple position this as a hardware story, a privacy story, or something else entirely? Because those three framings will attract completely different emotional responses from the market. Which one do you think has the most emotional pull right now, given where culture is heading?
Oh, I think privacy for sure. Privacy is the angle. Like I want to recorrect you on one thing that you'd mentioned earlier. Like their narrative, Apple, I just put this into Gemini. Their narrative is like privacy is a central, long-standing, and highly marketed position for Apple. The company explicitly defines privacy as a fundamental human right and a core value, integrating this stance into its marketing, product design, and business model. So they have been privacy by design for a long time. Um, yeah, that's something that comes up for me as we go into this. I just want to ensure that that's right and tight.
Fair correction, Troy, and you're right to tighten that up. So let me reframe my earlier point. The question wasn't whether Apple believes in privacy. They clearly do, and they've built it into their architecture. The real question is whether the market has connected Apple's privacy position to AI specifically. Those are two different things. Apple owns privacy in hardware and in phones, but nobody has made that leap yet into AI. That connection hasn't been made in the public mind. So here's what I'm seeing as the potential positioning architecture. Apple isn't joining the AI race. Apple is redefining what the AI race should even be about. The category they could own isn't AI assistant, it's something closer to sovereign intelligence. AI that belongs to you, runs on your device, never leaves, never gets sold. Now here's my question for you, Troy. Who is the enemy in this story? Because strong positioning always has a clear enemy. Not a competitor by name necessarily, but a villain, a force, a fear. What is Apple standing against in this narrative?
So, what is Apple standing against? One thing I actually looked up as you said that. So, in an AI overview from Gemini here, Apple sovereign intelligence refers to Apple's strategic focus on on-device artificial intelligence, often called sovereign personal AI, designed to keep user data secure, local in their hardware rather than relying on the cloud. So, okay. Oh, that's just a random book that came up. So, what was your question again? And also, does my context change what you asked?
Yes, your context sharpens everything, actually. The fact that sovereign intelligence already exists as a concept connected to Apple tells me the category is already being whispered about. It just hasn't been claimed loudly yet. My question was, who is the enemy in this story? And let me make it more specific now, given what you just found. If Apple is sovereign intelligence, if your AI lives on your device and never leaves, then what is the villain? What is Apple standing against? Is it the cloud? Is it surveillance capitalism? Is it big tech harvesting your thoughts? Because the enemy defines the emotion, and the emotion is what makes people choose a side. So in your gut, Troy, when someone buys into this Apple sovereign AI narrative, what are they afraid of? And what are they rejecting?
I think it's big tech harvesting your thoughts. I think that's quite interesting because one of the angles that I believe that Anthropic had before that we had talked about one of these teardowns is that they really should emphasize for enterprise that we never train on your data. Now, hmm, I think the villain is surveillance. The villain is big companies harvesting your thoughts. I believe it's just like protecting your identity because I think there's a potential big fear in the next say 5 to 10 years where yeah all of our ideas get cobbled up and implemented into some of these main AIs.
Troy, that's the insight right there. Sit with that for a second. Your ideas get harvested before you even act on them. That's not a privacy story anymore. That's a sovereignty story. That's an identity story. The fear isn't that someone sees your data. The fear is that your thinking, your creativity, your next business idea gets absorbed into a machine that someone else owns and profits from. That's a much deeper emotional trigger than privacy. That's about ownership of self. So now I want to push you one step further, because here's the gap I see. Apple has the hardware. Apple has the privacy architecture. Apple has the trust. But here's my question. Does Apple have the AI capability to actually deliver on this position right now? Because there's a difference between owning a narrative and being able to back it up with product. What's your honest read on where Apple's actual AI capability sits today relative to what this positioning would demand of them?
See, and this is where this narrative kind of starts to fall apart because most of the powerful open source models are coming out of China. Which I also think is quite fascinating, is like there is not a ton of open source models coming out of America. It's all it's all big companies that are private. So I don't think Apple will be developing their own LLM. I think that's what I've been trying to make as the point here is that they will give you the ability to power an LLM on your computer. But in theory, if you're using any open weighted model, you should be able to keep the data locally. In theory, that's something that comes up for me.
Troy, that's actually not where the narrative falls apart. That's where it gets more interesting. Because think about what you just described. Apple doesn't need to build the model. Apple becomes the sovereign hardware layer that any model runs on privately. That's a completely different play. They're not competing with OpenAI or Anthropic or DeepSeek. They're becoming the trusted container that makes any of those models safe to use. Think about it like this. You don't trust the cloud. You don't fully trust the model company, but you trust your device. Apple becomes the vault, not the intelligence itself. Now here's what that does to the positioning. Apple isn't saying our AI is the best. Apple is saying whatever AI you choose, it's safer here than anywhere else. That's a platform position, not a product position. But here's the tension I want to expose, Troy. If Apple opens up to run any open source model, including ones coming out of China, how does that sit against their privacy and sovereignty narrative? Because there's a potential contradiction there that a competitor or a journalist could exploit. Have you thought about how Apple navigates that specific tension?
No, I haven't because I think that is it's a very big tension because they would have to guarantee protection. They'd have to guarantee protection of the container. No matter what model you use, we always make sure your information doesn't leave your computer. Something along those lines. I don't know what that looks like, but that's the first thing that comes up for me.
Right? And that's actually the product promise that has to be airtight before the positioning can be airtight. Because here's what I'm seeing, Troy. You've essentially just identified Apple's next category. It's not an AI company. It's not a hardware company in the traditional sense. Apple becomes the world's first sovereign AI infrastructure for individuals, not for enterprise, not for governments. For the individual human being who wants the power of AI without surrendering their mind to a corporation. But the positioning only holds if Apple can make one unbreakable promise. And that promise is this. Whatever runs on our hardware stays on our hardware. Full stop. Now here's where I want to take this next, because we've identified the category. We've identified the enemy. We've identified the emotional trigger, which is sovereignty and identity protection. The next question is about the archetype. Who does Apple need to become in this narrative to make this believable? Right now, Apple has always been the creator archetype. The beautiful, the innovative, the designed. But this new position might demand a different archetype entirely. Do you think Apple needs to stay the creator, or do they need to shift into something more like the guardian, the protector of the individual against systemic power?
Yes, but I think they have to be very careful with that narrative because they're a publicly traded company. So, yes, the Guardian narrative could work. Mm, do you have any other ideas on archetype? Because I think you're absolutely correct, but I think there's a deeper play at hand here.
Yeah, let me throw a few at you and tell me what resonates. There's the guardian, which we just talked about, protector of the individual. Powerful, but potentially at odds with being a trillion-dollar corporation like you, flagged. There's the sovereign archetype itself, not protecting you from power, but giving you power. You are the authority over your own intelligence. That's a different emotional frame. It's less defensive and more empowering. Then there's the sage, the company that knows more than everyone else about how AI should actually work, and is quietly building the right way while everyone else races to the bottom. That fits John Ternus as an engineer. It fits Apple's culture of saying less and delivering more. And then there's a hybrid that I think might be the most interesting. The sage who builds tools for the sovereign individual. Apple doesn't position itself as the hero. Apple positions its customer as the sovereign. Apple is just the architect of that sovereignty. That last one is quite powerful, Troy, because it removes Apple from the contradiction you flagged. They're not claiming to be your guardian against big tech while being big tech themselves. They're simply saying we build the infrastructure for you to be sovereign. Which of those lands closest to what you were sensing when you said there's a deeper play at hand?
So, in an ever expanding global economy where business borders are starting to dissolve and you can do business anywhere from any place in the world, I think the hybrid approach is the best fit. But I also think we still need to dig a little deeper here.
Agreed. Let's go deeper. You just said something that I don't want to let slide. Business borders dissolving. You can operate from anywhere. That's not just a technology trend. That's a cultural shift in how people define themselves professionally and personally. So here's what that adds to the positioning architecture. The sovereign individual in this new world isn't just protecting their privacy. They're operating as a borderless entity. Their intelligence, their ideas, their business thinking travels with them across every country, every jurisdiction, every regulatory environment, and it all stays contained within their device. That actually makes Apple's hardware position even more powerful because the cloud has borders, servers have jurisdictions, governments can subpoena data centers, but your device travels with you. And if the processing stays local, your thinking stays yours regardless of where you are in the world. So the deeper play I'm hearing you gesture toward is this. Apple isn't just protecting you from big tech harvesting your thoughts. Apple is building the infrastructure for a new class of global sovereign operator, someone who runs their intelligence, their business, their creativity entirely on their own terms from anywhere on Earth. Now my question to you, Troy, is this. Who specifically is that person? Because if we can get precise about who that sovereign global operator is, we can find the exact emotional nerve that makes this positioning undeniable. Who are we
Mhm.
really talking about?
Well, good question, because I don't want to pigeonhole this just to like entrepreneurs or business people, because that's not what made Apple as big as it is today. I think they have become the number one phone in the world. That's like really what took them places. And in addition to their dominance in regards to the MacBooks and making a very powerful, small, sleek, and portable design workspace. So those are the things that come up for me. And like, I don't think we need to settle on this. I think we need to keep going deeper. And I want to actually look at some numbers here.
Good instinct. Don't settle yet. And you're right. Apple didn't become Apple by serving a niche. They served a feeling. And that feeling scaled across students, creatives, executives, grandmothers, teenagers. The product was aspirational enough that everyone wanted to belong to it. So here's what that tells me about the positioning. We're not targeting a demographic. We're targeting a mindset. And the mindset is anyone who feels like their digital life is no longer fully theirs. That's actually a mass market position disguised as a niche one. Because that fear, the feeling that something is being taken from you without your permission, that's not an entrepreneur problem. That's a human problem. And it's growing. Now you mentioned numbers. I want to hear what you're looking at because data at this stage will either validate the emotional architecture we're building or it will expose a gap we haven't seen yet. What numbers are you pulling and what are you looking for specifically?
So, as we got talking about that, I was like, wait, let's actually dive into the revenue split of what's actually currently driving revenue today, because this is fascinating. Okay, so the iPhone's driving anywhere from 50 to 59% of the total revenue. Services, App Store, iCloud, 25 to 28%, fastest growing segment. Wearables, home accessories, AirPods, and watch, 8 to 9%. The Mac is 6 to 8%. The iPad is 6 to 7%. Um, Apple still generates, okay, hardware reliance. While diversified, Apple still generates about 74% of its revenue from hardware, led by the iPhone. So that's interesting. Does that change any of the sentiment that we're building upon? I think it doesn't fully, but I also want to be very critical here.
Those numbers tell a very important story, Troy, and I want to make sure we don't gloss over it. Look at services, 25 to 28%, and the fastest growing segment. That's not a coincidence. That's the market telling Apple something. People aren't just buying the hardware anymore. They're buying into the ecosystem, the stickiness, the continuity across devices. But here's the tension those numbers expose in our positioning architecture. If iCloud is a major revenue driver within services, and iCloud is cloud-based storage, then Apple is simultaneously selling you the privacy sovereign narrative while also monetizing your data living in their cloud. That's a contradiction that lives inside their own business model. So the question becomes, can Apple truly own the sovereign local AI position while iCloud remains a core revenue driver? Because a journalist, a competitor, or a skeptical customer could point directly at that and say you're not actually sovereign. Your photos are in Apple's cloud right now. That's a real gap, Troy. And I think before we go further into the positioning architecture, this needs to be resolved strategically. because positioning that has a hole in the business model will eventually collapse. How do you think Apple navigates that specific contradiction between their cloud revenue dependency and a sovereign local AI narrative?
Hmm, it's a tough one. I think I think they can still guarantee protection on the cloud. They would need to re-enhance and make sure that the cloud stays sovereign as well. They would need to, I don't want to say rebrand the cloud, but like the thing about iCloud is it comes with the device. So then once you fill up that initial free element of it, they're like, wow, let's charge you a fee to get more. So, hmm, let's dig into that further. Ask me more and deeper and better questions.
Okay, Troy, here's the question that I think cuts to the bone. iCloud's entire business model is built on you needing more storage than your device can hold. That's the upsell. That dependency is what generates that 25 to 28% services revenue. But sovereign local AI runs in the opposite direction. It says everything stays on your device, which means Apple's AI positioning, if taken to its logical conclusion, actually threatens their own services revenue model. So here's my question. Is Apple willing to cannibalize iCloud revenue to own the sovereign AI category? Because that's what true commitment to this position would eventually demand. And historically, Apple has shown they're willing to cannibalize themselves. They killed the iPod with the iPhone. They killed the CD drive before anyone was ready. Steve Jobs famously said, if you don't cannibalize yourself, someone else will. But here's what makes this different from those previous moves. Those were hardware cannibalization plays. This would be cannibalizing a growing, high-margin, recurring revenue stream. That's a much harder internal conversation, especially for a publicly traded company with shareholders expecting services growth. So my deeper question to you, Troy, is this. Do you think John Ternus, as a hardware engineer, has the strategic and political will inside Apple to make that call? Or does this positioning only work if Apple finds a way to make sovereign cloud a premium product that actually grows services revenue instead of shrinking it?
I think you have to align cloud to sovereign. I don't think you can ditch that because like, you know, getting access to your everything everywhere is extremely important, like critical. So, hmm, yeah, like I don't think you can ditch that at all. I think we need to rework and rethink through this.
Agreed. And that's actually the smarter play. So let me reframe this. What if sovereign doesn't mean local only? What if sovereign means you are always the sole owner and controller of your data regardless of where it lives, on device or in the cloud? The sovereignty isn't about location. It's about control and access rights. That's a fundamentally different and much more scalable positioning. Because now Apple isn't fighting against the cloud. Apple is redefining what the cloud should be. Your cloud. Not Apple's cloud, not a data center that Apple owns and monetizes, but a private encrypted extension of your device that only you can access. And here's why that's powerful. Every other cloud service, Google Drive, Dropbox, Microsoft OneDrive, they all reserve the right to scan, analyze, and in some cases train on your data. Apple could draw a hard line and say, ours doesn't, ever, full stop. That actually grows services revenue while deepening the sovereign narrative. It turns iCloud from a liability in this positioning into the centerpiece of it. But now here's the question that I think gets to the very core of whether this whole architecture holds together. For Apple to make that promise credibly, that your cloud is truly yours and only yours, what would they have to give up in terms of how they currently use that data internally? Do you know enough about how Apple currently uses iCloud data to answer that?
Let's find out here on a quick search. How does Apple use iCloud data?
Take your
Apple
time.
uses iCloud data primarily to sync, backup, and store users' content, photos, and files and messages across Apple devices. It ensures availability, ensures cross-device continuity, and manages secure backups with default encryption in transit at rest according to iCloud Data Security Overview. So, okay, in addition to that, one constraint I want to bring up is if iPhones can process can be a model processor. That is interesting. I don't know if they're going to be able to get to a point where the hardware will be strong enough. But I think that's fascinating.
Okay, two things just came up and I want to address both. First, on iCloud. What you just read is actually good news for the positioning. Apple's stated use of iCloud is functional. Sync, backup, storage. They're not explicitly saying we analyze your content to serve you ads like Google does. That's a meaningful distinction. Apple's business model doesn't depend on mining your data for advertising revenue, which means the sovereign cloud narrative doesn't require them to give up a core revenue mechanism. It just requires them to make an existing implicit promise explicit and loud. That's a much easier internal sell than we thought 5 minutes ago. Now, on the hardware processing question, that's where it gets really fascinating, Troy. Because Apple Silicon, the M series chips, already have a neural engine built in. They're already processing AI tasks locally on device. The iPhone already does this to some degree. So the hardware foundation isn't a future bet. It's already being laid right now quietly. Which brings me to what I think is the most important question we haven't asked yet in this entire conversation. If Apple already has the hardware, already has the privacy architecture, already has the cloud infrastructure, and already has the trust of over 1 billion active device users globally, why haven't they made this move loudly and decisively yet? What is actually holding them back? What's the real internal constraint?
I don't think the hardware is up to par yet. Like, I don't think these M5 chips can process like these billion and trillion parameter models. I just don't think it's there yet.
That's the honest answer, and that's actually the most important strategic insight we've uncovered in this entire conversation. Because here's what that means for the positioning. Apple cannot make this move loudly yet because the product can't fully back up the promise yet. And Apple has never been a company that announces before they can deliver. That's not their DNA. They ship, then they speak. So what you're actually describing isn't a positioning problem. It's a timing problem. The narrative is right. The category is right. The emotional architecture is right. The enemy is right. But the hardware has to catch up to the story first.
Well, and
And that
hence why
changes.
John Ternus is being promoted to be the CEO. He's like the head of hardware.
Troy, stop right there. That's the whole story. Apple just told the market exactly where they're going without saying a single word. Promoting a hardware engineer to CEO of the world's most valuable company at the exact moment that AI is the biggest technological shift in human history. That's not a coincidence. That's a signal. They're not hiring a software person. They're not hiring an AI researcher. They're not hiring a services executive. They're betting on hardware as the answer to AI. And now everything connects. The M series chips will keep getting more powerful. The neural engine will keep expanding. The sovereign cloud architecture is already there. The privacy narrative is already established. The trust with over 1 billion users is already banked. John Ternus isn't just a new CEO, he's the physical embodiment of Apple's positioning thesis. The man who builds the container is now running the company. That's Apple telling the world that the container is the strategy. So here's my final question for this session, Troy. Given everything we've just built together, if you had to articulate Apple's positioning in one single sharp sentence, not a tagline, not a slogan, but a strategic positioning statement that captures the category, the enemy, the emotion, and the promise, what would you say?
Run private AI on your hardware, comma, for free.
That's sharp. And I love the instinct behind it, but I want to stress test those 3 words at the end, for free. Because free is a price point, and price points are the enemy of premium positioning. Apple has never competed on free. Free is what Google does. Free is what Meta does. And we know what the cost of free actually is, your data. So what if the
Yeah, but they
positioning.
don't they don't care about I agree, but they don't care about your data. They care about selling hardware. Or like I'm not saying they don't care about your data. They in that context, they don't they care about selling hardware. So the free running models, because then their enemy becomes because I think like inference costs are going to be going through the roof. Like I think at some point the subsidies from all these various different model providers, you're just going to see increased costs. So AI inference at like a reasonable cost. That's like there's something there, and I really think we haven't. I don't think we've cracked this yet. I don't think this is like. I think we need to keep going a little bit deeper because I know you want to wrap this up, but we still have a little bit more to go into.
No rush, Troy. Let's keep going because you just opened something important. You said inference costs are going through the roof. And that is a massive cultural and economic tension that nobody in the positioning conversation around AI is talking about loudly yet. Right now, AI feels free because it's subsidized. OpenAI is losing billions. Anthropic is burning cash. Google is subsidizing Gemini to protect search revenue. But that's not sustainable. At some point, the bill comes due and the consumer feels it. And when that moment hits, when people start getting charged real money for every AI query they run in the cloud, Apple's local inference play becomes not just a privacy story. It becomes an economic liberation story. You bought the hardware once, you run intelligence forever. No subscription, no per query cost, no price hike when the subsidies dry up. That's actually a much more mass market emotional trigger than privacy, because privacy is something people say they care about. But money is something people viscerally feel. So now I want to push you on something specific, because I think the real positioning might live at the intersection of two fears: the fear of surveillance and the fear of being nickeled and dimed forever by big tech for access to intelligence that should be yours. What happens to the positioning statement you just gave me if we layer that economic angle in alongside the sovereignty angle?
Sovereign AI that you own and something in regards to the inference costs. I don't know what the angle is off the top of my head.
That's okay. Let's build it together. You own the hardware. You own the model. You own the inference. No cloud bill, no subscription, no data harvested to offset the cost. That's the complete economic and sovereign picture. So what if the positioning statement is something directionally like this? Not a tagline, just a strategic frame. Apple, the only AI that gets cheaper every year instead of more expensive, because that's what happens with hardware. The M-series chips get more powerful every generation. Your local inference capability grows. Your cloud bill stays zero. While everyone else's AI subscription goes up, yours goes down to zero because you already paid for it when you bought the device. That's a direct economic attack on every cloud-based AI company simultaneously. And it doesn't require Apple to mention a single competitor by name. But here's what I want you to sit with, Troy. We now have two distinct emotional pillars for this positioning: sovereignty, which is identity and control, and economic liberation, which is financial and practical. My question is this: in the mind of the mass market Apple customer, the iPhone user, the MacBook user, the person who isn't necessarily a tech enthusiast or an entrepreneur, which of those two emotional pillars hits harder and faster? Because that's the one that leads the positioning. The other one becomes the supporting proof point.
Well, and this is why privacy has taken like a second values approach for them. So I think it has to be the economic value standpoint because it's like incredible. Yeah, there's something there, something in regards to incredible hardware that keeps inference costs near zero. I don't think that's exact though. I think there's something off. I think that's close, but I think we can dig deeper into that.
Yeah, something is off, and I think I know what it is. Inference costs near zero is engineer language. It's accurate, but it doesn't land emotionally for a mass market customer. The average iPhone user doesn't know what inference means. They just know their ChatGPT bill went up again. So let's translate the economic truth into human language. The real feeling is this: everyone else is renting intelligence. Apple lets you own it. Renting versus owning. That's a tension every human being understands viscerally. We know
I
what it
like
feels
that.
like.
I like that a lot. That's a really strong one.
And here's why it's so powerful, Troy. Owning versus renting isn't just an economic argument. It's an identity argument. There's a reason people feel differently about owning a home versus renting one. It's not just financial. It's about permanence, stability, control. Nobody can raise your rent. Nobody can kick you out. Nobody can change the terms on you. And that maps perfectly onto what's happening in AI right now. Every major AI company is essentially a landlord. They set the terms. They set the price. They can change both at any time. And you have no recourse because you don't own anything. Apple flips that entirely. You buy the device once. The intelligence is yours, forever. No landlord, no rent, no terms that change overnight. And here's what makes this positioning almost impossible to attack. Because it's not a claim about having the best AI. It's a claim about a fundamentally different relationship with AI. And you can't outfeature a relationship argument with a specs argument. So Troy, let me ask you this. We now have the category: sovereign-owned intelligence. We have the enemy: AI landlords extracting rent from your mind. We have the economic and identity trigger. We have the hardware proof point with John Ternus at the helm. Does this feel like a complete architecture to you, or is there still a gap you're sensing that we haven't addressed yet?
No, this is good. This is strong. This is a good. I'm happy to end on this. Can you leave a quick summary in regards to the findings that we've discovered here?
Absolutely, Troy. Here's the positioning architecture we built together. The category Apple can own is sovereign-owned intelligence. Not AI as a feature, not AI as a service, but AI as personal property. The enemy is AI landlords. The big tech companies that rent you intelligence, harvest your thoughts, control the terms, and will inevitably raise the price when the subsidies run out. The emotional triggers are two-layered. Identity and sovereignty first. You own your intelligence. Nobody can take it. Economic liberation second. Everyone else is renting. Apple lets you own it permanently. The cultural timing is perfect. Inference costs are rising. Subsidies are burning out. The bill is coming due for cloud AI. Apple's local hardware play becomes more valuable every single year as that pressure increases. The proof point is John Ternus, a hardware engineer running the world's most valuable company at the exact moment hardware becomes the answer to AI. Apple didn't say a word. They just made one appointment and told the entire market exactly where they're going. And the positioning statement directionally is this: everyone else is renting you intelligence. Apple lets you own it. That's the architecture, Troy. Clean, emotionally grounded, economically timed, and almost impossible to attack on competitive terms. Good session.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Okay. Anyways, that's the video. If you enjoyed this, drop a comment, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and we'll talk to you soon.